We didn't really know how to raise Seth.
Yeah, so I raised myself. And in doing so, I created the greatest super holiday known to mankind, drawing on the best that Christianity and Judaism have to offer. And you call it Chrismukkah.
And I'm recording over here. Sweet.
Nice.
All right.
Welcome.
Are you recording?
No, man. This is just pro bono today. You got to pay to get the good stuff.
Well, I need you to record, so make sure you hit record.
Yes, I am.
Welcome to Growing Up Punk, the podcast about punk rock and all of its friends. My name is David, and that is my friend. His name is
Aaron. And
Aaron. I'm never sure if I'm supposed to like introduce you and say what your name is, or let you say it. So it's always this like awkward thing where I'm like, and my friend is.
Maybe I should just get a name tag and people can see for themselves.
There you go. I just about ripped something off the wall. I just realized. Hold on. I just about ripped that post off the wall.
If we were professional, you would edit it so it looks like a news broadcast. So on the bottom and have our names and our titles. And
I'm wondering if it does though, because of Zoom. Like right now, when I look on my screen, it says our names. I can't remember if on the Zoom file, like the recording, if it does. So if you're watching,
I don't think so.
YouTube, and you can tell right now if it says our names or not. It's funny because every time I just kind of throw the video together, I'm like, oh, I should probably put like our Twitter, Instagram, like social media handles, like those things that kind of pop up here and there, because that's what all the good YouTubers do. But we're not like actual YouTubers. We're literally just throwing something together as we record a podcast. So if you're watching this, hello.
Welcome.
If you're just listening, ignore everything we just said to you.
If you're just listening, then we don't like you.
Yeah, but if you're watching or listening, go follow us on our social media, Twitter, Instagram, at Growing Punk Pod. You can also find us at growingpunkpod.com. Anything and everything you want to know about the podcast, it can be found basically in those three locations. So why don't you...
So if somebody tries to sell you a subscription to Ancestry.com, just say, I already got that info.
At growingpunkpod.com. Yeah. Like Ancestry, I know where I came from.
I will know who I am.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the beginning of what I've come to refer to as Guppy season. And it's a thing that we're going to make a thing every year. We're going to talk about Guppy season. Basically, what I mean by that is, I was explaining this to my wife. I think I actually had to explain it to you as well. You're like, I just don't get the Guppy thing. And I was like, well, Gup is, like...
I got that part.
Yeah, growing up punk. And then I was like, I was comparing it to the Dundies, Dunder Mifflin, The Office, and their yearly awards that they do.
Yeah.
Or, like the Grammys, the Emmys, whatever. That's what the Dundies were kind of referencing, right? So I was like, it's stupid because we both have like kind of agreed that we hate like the the abbreviation or whatever, GUP, for growing up punk. It just kind of looks kind of, but I'm like, I'm gonna embrace it for Guppy season. So what this is we are about to, you've seen the title of the episode, you know what we're talking about in this episode, but as far as Guppy season is concerned and what that means is it's more than just one episode. Today we are going to talk about our top 10 albums of the year, more specifically focusing on our top 5. We'll get into all that in a few minutes, but if you're thinking like, why is that part 1? This is the funny thing. I feel like that should be part 2, like the big like year ender as we talk about our favorite albums of the year. And maybe going forward, we'll make sure we structure it that way. But when it came time to figure out recording this stuff, this just happened to be the order we were recording in. So you get our top 10 albums first, and then in the next episode, we're going to highlight a couple EPs that were released that we liked. So the records in this episode are all full lengths. That's the one thing you'll notice. So we'll talk about some EPs next time, but then we're also going to actually get into handing out what we're going to call the Guppies Awards. We've got different categories, and they're not real awards by any means. It's just we're going to pick our favorites in different categories, and I thought it would be fun to give it a stupid name. So that's where we're at with the Guppies. And just so you know, we're recording this in July, so there could be some albums that we missed. No, I do, before we get into our records, I did want to say that we are recording. There are still a couple albums that are to come out that I'm looking forward to. that could potentially make my top 10, but I don't think that they will. But so if, we're recording this late November, by the time this comes out, it's going to be late December. So we may miss a couple. And to that, we apologize to bands like Less Than Jake and Goldfinger. We actually haven't heard your records yet, or Hatebreed.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy that bands and I know this year has kind of thrown off a lot of things. Like some of these bands might have not thought they had records coming out, but it is such a weird time to put that out because, I mean, even though people will keep listening to those, there is something that, January hits and it's like, oh, that album came out last year.
Yeah.
Okay, now what's coming out next? There's already some big releases that have been announced for, the first, quarter of the year. And so hopefully that's not a detriment to bands that they're putting it out that time of year.
Well, Goldfinger especially, they announced literally from when we're recording, it was just the other day, but it's an album that's coming out in a couple weeks. So surprise, we've got some new music coming, which is cool. And I think something that I'm kind of surprised more bands maybe didn't do this year, in just being like, what else are we doing? We can't tour. So we huddled up together and recorded this, even if it's like a 5-song EP or whatever, and surprise, here's some new music for you. I'm kind of surprised that that hasn't happened a little bit more. But at the same point, it's been a year that's kind of been so unknown that how bands are probably in a lot of times just kind of sitting and waiting, going we don't even know what's next. So we don't want to commit to anything in the meantime.
Yeah, I think lots probably thought it was going to be over sooner. So it's okay, let's plan to, put it out when hopefully we're back touring again, or, but as things just progress and keep prolonging, I'm sure there's lots of we should have just gone for it. But at the same time, they're putting so much into it, they don't necessarily want to just throw it out there and without a plan, or I don't know.
Well, especially as you mentioned, thinking it would be over sooner sort of thing, because tours that were canceled, I remember initially Jimmy Eat World was rescheduled. It was supposed to be it's either March or April. I want to say it was April. And initially they'd rescheduled for November. It would have, just recently happened for me. But look where we're at. We're nowhere even near, ready for this sort of thing. Right. So it's pretty crazy to think that basically a whole year, not quite yet, but was just washed, and who knows for how much longer. Maybe by the time this comes out, we have a better idea, because we're recording it more than a month in advance. That's weird for us, but we decided, I don't know why I'm sharing this, but we decided to kind of, get this done when we're doing it, so that we can have the month of, or most of the month of December off anyway. So again, that's just kind of a bit of I guess a precursor sort of thing, just saying, hey, heads up, there could actually be some records that came out after this that we really like. But you know what? I don't think I could have made up my mind by then anyways, because I was thinking about this in prepping my list for this year. I was looking back, because this year musically, I felt like there were a lot of really good records that came out. And in a lot of ways, it reminded me of 2018, where there were a lot of good records that came out in 2018 too. Every year there's a lot of good records that come out, but just that kind of oh, what's in my top 5? This is actually a bit of, competition, things moving in and out. But I was thinking back on my picks from 2018. That was Trash Boat, Crown Shyness was my number one record that year. And I still think by far and away, it is my number one record from that year still. But albums like Proper Dose from The Story So Far, and even Swell from Tiny Moving Parts have over the years, I feel they've really moved forward and moved up in my list. And it's just because, of the time that I've been able to spend with those records more, being actually, these are both really good. And I don't remember. Yeah. I think they were probably 5 and 4. So they were up there anyway. So, but that's all to say that these lists they're just what we're picking, and that's that. So how this will work is we're going to go through our 10 through 6. We're going to go back and forth. So Aaron will say his 10, I'll say my 10, 9 sort of thing.
Oh, starting at the bottom. Okay.
Yeah, well, we got to work to number 1. We don't if we tell them number 1 right now, they just turn the episode off and they go, all right, moving on.
I thought we were doing it in a random order, then we were trying to guess each other's. Are we not doing that?
We did that last year for our top 5. So that's what I'm saying. Our 10 through 6 for sure, we will go in order. and just kind of go through them. And then you're like, I didn't put them in order. And then 5 through 1, if you want, last year we did them and we just kind of set our 5 through 1 randomly and then tried to guess and then kind of revealed where we actually had them. So we could do that for sure. But I did want to get into, I think, like I said, numbers 10 through 6 we'll go through in order.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so we're just going to kind of not just like speed through them, but we'll take a closer look at 5 through 1 than we will for 10 through 6. So I guess let's jump into it. What was your number 10 release of the year?
So this one, this spot was, there was a handful of albums that were kind of fighting for this spot, but I decided to give it to a band called the Fizz Gigs.
Nice.
So they were a band that, they're kind of from the ashes of another punk, or not from the ashes, I guess some shared members or past members or whatever, from another awesome Canadian punk band called Belvedere. And this band had kind of come up because I think you were going to interview them, and I think just the name, I was like, oh, I don't know, never heard of them, whatever, not that interested. And then it was like the next day or maybe sometime that week, they had a sponsored ad on Instagram of one of their videos, and it caught my ear, and I was like, oh, okay, go watch the video. And then the album came out and went and listened to it, and I immediately liked it. It's a really fun listen. It's got a lot more going on than maybe the typical pop punk band. They've got awesome melodies and overall songwriting. They kind of remind me of a band like the Swellers that, they're kind of in that punk, skate punk realm, but they stand out a bit more due to things like the melodies and kind of little things in the songs that make them stand out above the rest. And this is an album I've put on a lot. It's a great summer album, but also an anytime album. And it's also one of those that I kind of forget about. And then when I'm scrolling through the list of bands and I see it, it's like, oh yeah, I want to listen to that again. Like, it always kind of keeps me coming back. And so, yeah, it's a really cool album.
It's interesting, yeah, that you say an album that you often forget about, because as you said it here, I'm like, oh, I totally forgot about that album. And this really kind of sets up how, prepared and how great we are with our lists here. Because I'm just looking to see, do I not have it in my library? No, I do. So when I was like going back through the albums that came out this year, I just went into my Apple Music, my iTunes, and sorted by release year. And I don't even remember seeing that one come up. So I must have just breezed by it. But yeah, it is a really fun record. And I think, yeah, their artist rep or whatever reached out early on. And I don't know we ever got to the point of setting up an interview. Like we had talked about it, and then I never followed through. It was just like this sort of, I was like, oh, this is actually really good, and then kind of forgot all about it because 2020 was crazy. It was a messed up year. But my number 10 is a record that surprised me because I'm not actually a big fan of this band, so that they made the top 10 sort of surprised me a little bit. But that's Neck Deep, All Distortions Are Intentional. And this record, when they announced it, I added it to, I did the pre-ad thing. The lead singles were nothing that were like selling me by any means, but I was like, all right, we'll put it on. And it came out the day, like I think it was the morning we were leaving to drive back from my parents' house. So we were just about to drive across the country. And so I made sure when I got up that morning that I downloaded it before we hit the road or whatever. Cause like, well, I actually want to check it out. And I listened to it twice back to back, just driving, because it was like immediately I was like, because it's a real well flowing record. And I compared it when I did a review of it. I compared it actually to Proper Dose by The Story so far, just in not necessarily being a big fan of the band going in, but the band changing something, because I think it's fair enough to say, while Proper Dose might have been more of a departure for The Story so far than All Distortions Are Intentional for Neck Deep, like there's still some kind of change that happened, and I really enjoyed this record. It's one that I can put on, and it just sort of, it is a concept album too, which I like. So it's telling the story of a guy, and I don't know, I was surprised by it. So it made my top 10 right at number 10. So what's your number 9?
Yeah, I was going to say with that one, that's one I don't typically forget kind of about bands. And that one, I had listened to some of the songs and wasn't that super into, but I did have it in my mind that, okay, I want to at least go and listen through it, from start to finish at least. And I've never done that yet. So I'm definitely going to add that. And and go do that, because that's one that I kind of forgot about / just kind of put in the back of my mind. This kind of thinking, I'm not super interested, but I definitely think it could be, especially after mentioning what my number 9 is, which is Big Vibe by Seaway, because this is also one so Seaway and Neck Deep, I kind of are similar in the sense that, at least for me, like, they're both decent enough. I don't dislike it, but I never like fully loved it. And this album, again, kind of caught me off guard. I don't think I listened to any of the singles that came out if they released some. On release day, I put this on, and it just immediately caught my ear. And it's super catchy. They lean a bit more heavily kind of into 90s influence, which I really like. It kind of reminded me of some parts of 4 Year Strong, where, they kind of have that 90s influence, but not in a way that, not 90s influence, kind of where it's just kind of an alternative rock song that's kind of like, okay, but it adds something. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but
we'll say it does.
Yeah, and I don't know, this album was just a lot less kind of annoying for me. I've kind of found Seaway a little obnoxious, and I don't know if it's just kind of some of the lyrical content or whatever it is, but I don't know. This one is one that I love going back to, and I'll keep going back to it, and definitely a nice surprise release for me.
It's interesting that you kind of brought up Seaway alongside Neck Deep, because the first time I saw Seaway live, they were opening for Neck Deep, and it was the main reason I went to the show. I was like, oh, I really want to see Seaway, and it just so happened that Neck Deep was headlining, so there you go. My number 9 pick is actually very similar to yours, because it is Seaway, Big Vibe.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and so this record, much of what you said, I don't know if I can't remember what order the singles came out for this record before it was released, but I feel like maybe the first one I wasn't big on, and then they released one. I wish I could remember. I want to see if I can look it up, because they released a single shortly before the record was to come out, and all of a sudden I was like, oh, this is actually a really good song, and I'm wondering. I'm just going to take a look here. No, I was wondering if it was Big Vibe. It's not Big Vibe. Still Blue. They released the video for Still Blue, and it's just like kind of this crazy, weird, like video where I think they actually give a warning before it that they're like, if this video has a lot of flashing lights and blah, blah, blah. And it's like all shot in like fisheye lens sort of thing, much like I think my camera is probably doing right now. But it's just like, that song came on, I was like, oh, I really like this. And when the record first came out, I remember you commenting and saying like, oh, I actually really enjoy it. And it took me some time to really get in and appreciate it. And I think really what it wasn't like I'd put it on and be like, oh, this isn't actually what I was thinking. It was, I put it on, I was like, yeah, this is what I expect. And then I don't remember exactly when it came out, but I was more like, okay, what's over here? It just kind of became this thing where I was like, yep, that's what I was expecting from Seaway. It's good, but I want to hear some different things here and there. And so it took me a while to kind of really come around to it and put it on and really listen to it. And I mean, Seaway is a band that I enjoy. I've seen them out of like the newer, like this generation of pop punk bands. They're probably the band I've seen the most. Because they seem to come, I mean, being in Canada, they seem to come quite frequently. And so I usually try to go anytime I can, because they put on a fun show. Because it took me, I remember when I first saw them, I was kind of like, they're okay. I had a friend who really liked them. And so that's why I went to the show, because I knew he was a big fan. He was going to the show. I was like, all right, it looks like a good show. And Speak Low, If You Speak Love was on that show as well with Neck Deep and Seaway. And it took me halfway through their set, I realized, I was like, oh, Seaway's totally just like a party band, and they're super fun for it. Like in a time when pop punk is like more serious, I want to say, than it's ever been, like lyrically, I feel Seaway has just always sort of been this band that just gets up on stage and they just want to have fun. And it took me a little bit to realize that, but once I did, it kind of clicked. And so I've always enjoyed them, and this record is no different. It just took me a couple extra minutes to come around and go like, oh yeah, I actually need to listen to this, because I know it's good, just exploring other stuff. But what's your number 8 record?
Yeah, so moving to number 8 is another beautiful surprise of an album that many had been anticipating, yet maybe didn't think would happen, especially with this lineup, and that is the new Misery Signals album, Ultraviolet. So Misery Signals has always been a band that knows how to create these beautiful, heavy songs that just sound like Misery Signals. When I put their records on, I know it's them. There's a lot to digest on this album, and that may be kind of my only complaint with this. At times I find it hard to maybe differentiate, one song from the next. Each song has so much going on in so many parts that, and they're all done super well. But for me, at least, it takes a lot of lessons to a lot of listens to fully kind of take it in. So I need a lesson on how to listen to this band. I was kidding, and that's not a bad thing. I've said this before. Like sometimes there's just music that doesn't. It's just not as easy to digest for whatever reason, and that's not a fault of the band. That's what they're trying to go for. And overall, I love this album. I love everything this band puts out, and just super excited to have new music from them. And every time I put it on, even though it takes a long time to kind of digest it, I'm just amazed at their musicianship and how they kind of piece together songs. Again, like I said, are so heavy, but also kind of beautiful at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Misery Signals is an interesting band for me because as long as I've been aware of them, I've never really listened to them. And if I recall, they came out of kind of like the ashes of a band who I actually grew up going to shows and seeing. Because when they originally formed, like some of the members were from Compromise, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah, which I believe Compromise was from either Calgary or Edmonton. Like they were like a local hardcore band for the scene that I grew up in, and I remember going and seeing them, and like they always put on a great show. And when I heard about Misery Signals, I've listened to them but never really gotten into them, I guess. But I also feel like, if memory serves, they're heavier than Compromise ever was, but so maybe that's where I kind of like lost it. But when you had your I want to say must have been your interview with Stu Ross, either that or Misery Signals came up in another episode with one of your interviews, but there was a song of theirs that I listened to for the episode that was like, oh, this is actually really good. But can't say I've actually listened to that record. My number 8 actually has a typo, I just noticed. Because I wrote down the title of the album, Hell, It's You, but that's not true. It's Bearings, and the album is called Hello, It's You. And this album
made it in there.
Yeah, this album, I think, in a similar way where you said with Misery Signals, like it was kind of like, well, you said Misery Signals was a pleasant surprise because you didn't expect it. Whereas like Bearings, this record, Bearings is a funny band for me. So tying it back to Seaway, I was introduced to Bearings because they opened for Seaway on one of the shows that I went and saw. And Blue in the Dark came out in 2018. That was their album before this one, and which I said 2018 was a good year. And it's a great album. But similarly to Blue in the Dark, Hello, It's You, the singles that came out ahead of time didn't really convince me that I was going to get into the album. If I recall, with Blue in the Dark, I was kind of like, they're okay. And then the album comes out and I fall in love with it as I listen to it. Hello, It's You, the singles kind of came out and I was like, oh, they're doing something a little bit different. Like they've added an element, which is cool, but they're still like not really, I'm not super excited. I don't think the album's going to be that great. And then it comes out, and as we're recording this, it literally came out yesterday. And I have listened to it probably 5 times over the course of that or so, and convinced that each time I listen to it, I like it more and more. So going back to where I said, like, it's funny with lists that as time goes on, that list kind of changes because you get to spend more time with records. And this one could have very well ended up higher in the list if it came out earlier in the year and I'd been listening to it more. Right. So right now it is where it is. I do really like it a lot. There's like the odd misstep here and there where I'm kind of like, I'm not huge on that. But overall, as the record goes, I think it's pretty fantastic. So why don't we get into your number 7?
Number 7 for me is Silverstein's A Beautiful Place to Drown. So I've come to love Silverstein over the last number of years, especially considering I really wasn't into their earlier records. They just seem to be getting so much better with time and continually put out music that sounds fresh and exciting while still sounding like Silverstein. and this new album is no exception. The songs are very well written and composed in a way that is interesting to the listener. They still have their heavy and melodic moments, but this album sees them exploring, some more kind of synth-related sounds, as well as focusing on bigger sounding songs that may, appeal to a bigger audience. I'm not saying that to say like it sounds super mainstream or anything, but the energy and momentum is still there, but in a way that maybe isn't as abrasive as maybe what they're known for. And one of the parts I loved about the song is they have some really cool guest spots. They have Aaron Gillespie and Caleb Schummel from Beartooth, and there's another song that has a guest spot on it that I wasn't super familiar with. I think it was maybe like a female rapper or something. And so they just seem like they push themselves, and I've said lots of times I don't necessarily love when bands kind of progress their sound, but Silverstein does it in a way that, to me, it still sounds like them. It's still super energetic and catchy, but just kind of exploring a few different sounds to add into that while still sounding like them. So yeah. I kind of see it as one of those albums that it might not be for everyone, but there's kind of something for everyone on it if you're a fan of them or that kind of music.
Yeah, I listened to that record on part of my drive for sure. I didn't really give that record a ton of time. Silverstein was always a band that I was aware of, but never really fully got into, but can appreciate them when they come on. So this year saw, as I get into my number 7, a number of, or a few bands at least, that hadn't released records for a long time that were releasing records. And I've got a couple that made my list. So this is the first one at number 7 for me is Slick Shoes with Rotation and Frequency. This was a record that was kind of like I say, they hadn't been releasing music for a long time, which is true. Like, cause it had been what did we figure their last album was? Was it 2000?
17 years?
Yeah, 2003. I mean, they had, what's it called? Broadcasting Live. That came out, a live album, right? And they had that one single, I can't remember the name of it, that came out at one point that really wasn't that good. But they had been, when they got back together initially, it was like you could tell there was like some kind of momentum. And obviously we sort of knew that there was something in the works because we've been in contact with the band quite a bit, and having done a number of episodes about and with them, it was expected that this record was coming. And when it came, I was pleasantly surprised. And for me, it was one of those records where when it first came, I was like, okay, like this is really good. And then it's kind of like time came, went on. I felt like other records kind of like passed it in the standings, but still a really solid like return for a band. Like when you think about some other bands that, they go on hiatus or whatever for an extended period of time, and then they come back and the record they release is like, okay, like they actually put out, when people have said, I've read some pretty outrageous comments. I don't know if it's fair to say they're outrageous, but people saying like either A, it's Slick Shoes' best record, period, or B, I saw this one, it's the best punk or pop punk record to come out in the last, 10 years or whatever. And I'm like, well, that's crazy. That's not true. You could make an argument. I would not have a problem with you making an argument that it's their best, because the guitar work on this record is outstanding. And I think the songwriting in general is really good. For me, like Rusty is always just going to hold that place, in my heart. And a lot of that could just very well be, nostalgic sort of thing. But let's move on to our number 6s. What was your number 6?
Yeah, number 6 for me was The Death of Me by Polaris. So this is one of my number 5 ties. I kind of got pushed down the list. Now, I've known of Polaris for a number of years, but for whatever reason, just kind of never gave them a solid listen. But they started releasing singles from this album, I started paying more attention and was very glad I did, as the songs were amazing. There's not necessarily anything specifically special about this album. However, what they do it really well. The songs are crafted beautifully. They blend heavy and melodic super well. The music is put together really well, and vocally, there's lots of great vocals on here, just dynamics, and so it's just one of those albums that, it fits within that metalcore, kind of genre, but without it being kind of boring or predictable. And it's just a super solid album if you're into this kind of stuff. I always love going back to it. It's got great production on it, and just a really good heavy banger.
Sweet. I definitely haven't listened to it. I don't think I have. Maybe like I know the name, but I don't recall
Remember-
listening to it at all. But
You listened to a song, but there was like kind of a not a full blown guitar solo, but a partial one. And so you were just like, "Oh, I like this," until the guitar solo came in.
stupid guitar solos, that's going back to a few text conversations we've had. I don't absolutely hate guitar solos. I do like giving guitar solos a hard time though. Especially for me, guitar solos where it's like, oh, bands that just like make it a part of their song every song. I'm kind of like, I don't need it. It's not something I miss if it's not there, I guess you could say. But
So you don't like Dragon Force?
yeah, I mean,
It's
funny
just
that
all
you
guitar solos.
yeah, it's funny that you brought Dragon Force up because in your interview with Ryan Schuler, you were talking about Dragon Force at the end of it.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, my number 6 is Spanish love songs, Brave Faces, Everyone, which I feel there were a couple records that came out this year where the titles were very fitting for 2020 without being like there were also a number of records that came out that just used 2020 in their title because, bands thought they were being witty or whatever because it's 2020 and 2020 vision, like all that kind of stuff. But Brave Faces, Everyone, I think is a very fitting title for people because it's been a weird year, man. Like, some people deal with it like, no big deal. And there's some people who've dealt with everything where it's just like, they don't know what the next thing is and their anxiety is through the roof. And so something like, needing to put on a brave face, I think can hit home. And Spanish Love Songs for me was a band that really up until this record, they felt like the Wonder Years 2.0, like, vocally I feel like they share some similarities with the Wonder Years, and then I mean just in the genre that they're in, you're going to make those comparisons, but I really feel like Brave Faces, Everyone put them on their own trajectory or their own sort of level thing. I don't know if it was earlier this year or later last year, like the Wonder Years actually took Spanish Love Songs out on tour, which definitely kind of helps drive that home a little bit. But I don't know. I just thought it's a really raw, really honest record, and it's well performed. And so it was one that was much like how you said, Polaris was kind of in and out of your top 5. This one was in and out of my top 5 at different times as well. And in like the past couple weeks as we sort of narrowed it down. But in the end, it's number 6. So we're going to jump into our top 5s, but as we discussed earlier, we're not going to put them when we talk about them, they're not going to be in order. We're going to try and figure out each other's top 5s in order after we've discussed them. So why don't you go with one of your top 5 records?
I'm just going to go with the way I made the notes on it. It's not in order, so that works good for me here. Yeah, so this is one, another one that I had been waiting a long time for, and actually, by the time this one comes out, the interview I did with Joe, who's the singer of this band, who I interviewed last night, from the band Lightworker, and it's their album Fury by Failure. So there's a few items, albums kind of fighting for this spot, so kind of between the 5, kind of 6, going back and forth. And but ultimately, Lightworker takes the win for me. This was another very anticipated album for me. I've had an ongoing kind of online friendship with their singer Joe over the last few years, and so we've talked, many, many times about just music, and then this album, and getting signed to Solid State, and kind of how everything was coming together, and some of the challenges that were surrounding this. And so, it kind of felt like an eternity before their first single dropped. But when it did, I loved it. I couldn't wait to listen to it, and was very happy with what came into my ears. I mean, I'm such a sucker for bands like this, and and I don't mean this as like a slight when I say like it doesn't take much to kind of get me with this, but there's still so much, more of this album. It's not just your mediocre metalcore album. While it has all the elements you would expect from a metalcore band on Solid State, they do everything so well and smoothly that it just stands out above the rest for me. One of those elements is lead singer Joe's vocals. He's got a really unique voice. And most of the vocals on this album are actually singing versus screaming. There's a little bit of screaming, but it's mostly singing. So that's kind of unique in its own way. He's just got this awesome range, and just adds so much to the music, which is already awesome. And so I can listen to this album over and over and keep visiting it and just never get tired of it. There's a lot to take away for this. So if you're a fan of of melodic and heavy metalcore, then you're definitely going to like this album.
Right on. One of my top 5 was, I mentioned earlier when I talked about Slick Shoes, was a band that hadn't released something for a while. I think it had been about 8 years since these guys put out their last record. It's the Casket Lottery, short songs for end times. And much like I think with Bearings, when I first heard like the first single or two, I was kind of like, yeah, it sounds like the Casket Lottery, but it wasn't doing anything. I don't think they were ever a band that immediately like hooked me, where I heard a song and went, I'm going to love this, I need to get it, sort of thing. But knowing that I was a fan of the Casket Lottery in the past, I thought, oh, I should, I'm going to add this. This is also big news, kind of in the world of like post-hardcore emo sort of thing. Like they're a band that had put out some pretty big records, and they were back putting out music. And so I decided, I'm going to listen to it. And, you didn't say, sorry, what song was your standout off of Lightworker?
I was going to wait till you were done talking, and I was going to ask that.
What was your, you got to get to that first, man. You just got to nail it.
Yeah. My favorite song is one called Remove the Earth. And as you'll hear, if you listen to my interview with Joe talking about Solid State Records, that this song is a really personal one to him, because it's kind of a song that he used as he was kind of working through the emotions of his mom getting diagnosed with cancer. And so it was actually a song that he says that kind of took a long time to come together. But so that just kind of makes it even more meaningful, as my mom as well has also gone through that journey of beating cancer or going through it. And so it just kind of means that much more. But yeah, it's just got a really awesome groove to it. It kind of reminds me of early 2000s metalcore. The vocals on this song really actually remind me of a band called Every New Day that we've talked about before, which is one of my all-time favorite bands. And so that's a bonus, but it's just a super catchy song, and also really heavy and melodic. It just kind of has all the elements that I love to it. And just every time it comes on, I just want to start headbanging. So that's my standout track for that album.
While you're riding your bike to work.
Oh man, always.
Yeah.
Just thrashing as I weave in and out of traffic. And...
so let's do it this way so that we make sure we get it in there. So the Casket Lottery, short songs for end times. The song that I really love is the song Everything is Broken, which I think is a pretty apt description for 2020 as well. But back to the record, it was this thing where they had some songs that came out, and initially I was like, all right, sounds good, but it didn't build, and maybe this is a good thing. It didn't set my expectations so high that they could be, like let down sort of thing. Right. But so when I first listened to it, it immediately drew me in, and, it was like one of those instances where I listened to it a ton of times over the first couple days, and then just kind of kept coming back to it and whatever. And so I think it's pretty awesome that both with the Casket Lottery and even Slick Shoes, a couple bands that hadn't put out records for a while, they actually came back and put out records that are just as good, if not better, than some of their like peak sort of stuff. And like that's some of the talk I've seen about the Casket Lottery's record for sure. And I think for myself, I can like I've put myself sort of in that camp where I go, man, this is better than some of their stuff they were putting out, at their peak type thing. And so I think it's pretty awesome. But what's your next one?
My next one is one that you just touched on a few times. That's Rotation and Frequency by Slick Shoes. I think it's safe to say that this was probably my most anticipated album of this year, and I only had to wait 17 years, like we mentioned. This is an album that many, if not most people, would have never expected to happen. We knew they were back playing shows, and they released that live record, like we said, and I think most of us would have just been happy with even that, as that was more than we expected. But when they said that they were in the studio working on a new album, I think that's when people really started to get excited, including myself. It was super cool having the guys on the show leading up to the release, like we mentioned, and which just made me even more excited to hear what they had created. The first single they released immediately had my attention, and every song after that. I listened to the album multiple times all the way through on release day and many times since. initially I had some thoughts maybe kind of against it, as did some others, online, like you said. But the more I listen, the more those things just kind of seem to go to the back of my mind. And I simply enjoy the amazing songwriting and musicality that Slick Shoes has to offer. And it's just, quickly, I think it's one of those initial kind of shock things. And this happens with various things. Maybe it's like a piece of art or an artwork where you see it. And especially when you had so much time to anticipate it, your initial thought is just like, oh, maybe I don't like it as much as I thought. I don't know if that's just the way the brain works. And so it's just a lot to process. And so it just takes time. And yeah, like I said, some of those things that maybe initially it was like, I don't know if that's my favorite choice. It just doesn't really bother me anymore. And I don't know, love the album a lot and just keep going back to it. And very grateful that they're back creating more music.
And what was your song off this record?
Well, the song I'm going to go with is Whispers. So I believe that's the opening track. Again, it's the first song I heard. It's the first single that they released. And so, I mean, even just because of that, it's probably the one I've listened to the most. It just has such a classic Slick Shoes sound to it and has some really cool parts in there that hooked my ear the first time I listened to it. And so that one's just always stood out.
It's a great song. I think for me, I really love the song. Is it Moments? I think on that record.
Yeah.
I just love the guitar work on that song. The song itself is a little different and weird, but like the guitar on that I love. My next record in my top 5 that I'm going to talk about is Be Well, The Weight and the Cost. And
Awesome.
this one was a surprise for me because I think you had, I think you said you'd either mentioned, I don't know if you shared, I for sure, if you sent me something, I didn't listen to it, which happens all the time. You'll like all of a sudden send me like links to YouTube videos, and sometimes I get to them, sometimes I don't. And then we text so much that sometimes it just gets buried.
Yeah.
So I remember like when I first put this on, I was like, or maybe you actually sent it to me on release day. I can't remember. And then I checked it. I was like, holy crap, this is really good. And it's just been one that, I've kind of consistently gone back to. I think my favorite song on the record is Confessional, which this song it's weird because A, it's the last track on the record, and B, it's also a single. So as far as on the, at least on the like the digital streaming version, it's kind of funny because you have Confessional and then immediately following it you have Confessional, the radio edit, because they included the radio edit there. And I'm like, that's weird. Like why do that? Because then when you're just like playing through, you get the same song 2 times in a row with a slight variation. But it's when Brian McTernan first sang the line, I only know a few chords and a lot of mixed metaphors, I was like, oh, that's really awesome. And it's just like stuck with me. And this record, I shared it as one of like our, new music discussions. And I know like Roger Camaro brought it up when he was on. It's one of the most like raw and urgent records I think I've heard in a while, at least vocally. And then musically, it's, it's fast at times, it's heavy at times. It's an all around great, like hardcore sort of record thing. But yeah, it was, I love it. And I actually just got it on vinyl not too long ago. It finally came in the mail. So that was exciting.
This is one of those albums that like there's probably not a whole lot of albums competing kind of with this style. I can't think of really any other kind of anything similar to that. And so yeah, it definitely stands out in that regards. And yeah, I loved listening through this album. Was it the summer when it came out or whenever that was? And
yeah, I could look it up, but I don't remember exact date. But yeah, go on.
Yeah, and I remember, so that first single came out and they kind of announced, it was kind of a super group of sorts, guys from different bands, and so I love that first song. Then I think it was the next one. I was like, oh, maybe this isn't really what I thought it was, and I don't know why that was. I can't remember. But then the album came out and it all sounded good. So I'm not sure why that second one sounded different to me or something. But
it came out August 21st.
Okay,
so there you go.
So it was in the summer.
Yeah, late summer. But yeah. Anyway, what's your next record from your top 5?
So this is one that came out earlier in the year, so we've had a lot of time. And I know this album has been special for you too, and that is Brain Pain from 4 Year Strong. This was, I had very high expectations of this release and had a lot of anticipation again surrounding this. Because it had been a few years since our last full length came out. And the last one was good, but I don't know, never really kind of had me coming back time and time again. But then when they released the first two singles, which they released the same time, I knew this album would be special. There's so much to love about this album. It's definitely 4 Year Strong, but I kind of say like a modern 4 Year Strong, which, you know, doesn't mean they've lost any of their energy or sound that their fans love, but they've kind of made a more dynamic and interesting experience for the listener. Maybe some more 90s influence in there. You know, there's a slower kind of ballad type song and then a more atmospheric song to end it. But all that to say, there's so much energy and creativity on this album that I find myself kind of finding new things to love each time I listen to it. I never get sick of listening to this album, and it's found its way into my constant rotation of albums since it came out.
What's your favorite song on this one?
That was a hard one to pick. I ended up going with Get Out of My Head. This is like I said, a hard one to pick, but I'm going this one just because it's so catchy. It's got a really cool 90s feel to it, but it also has this grittiness that kind of keeps the song feeling heavy and grounded, kind of versus a light feeling 90s alternative song or whatever. But just something about this song just gets me super excited when it kind of comes in, and you know, it's just kind of got a simple kind of chord progression, but it's just, I don't know, something about it that just gets me.
It's also insanely catchy and memorable. Like as soon as you say the title of the song, it's stuck in my head. So Get Out of My Head. The song that I went with, because I mean, I'll talk about it now, might as well, because it is in my top 5, Brain Pain. The song that I went with, actually, there were a couple tracks off this album that I could have gone with, and I decided to save one for something that we're going to talk about in our next episode. I didn't want to get repetitive with that. So the song I went with for this time is actually the opening song, It's Cool, because it's an incredible opening song. Now, it's one of those opening tracks, I think, that doesn't really set you up for what's coming. Like it does. It's not a song that it's like, oh, you know, kind of here's what you can expect on the album. It's so different from the rest of the album, but also not like, oh, like that sounds like it could be off a different album. You mentioned like the atmospheric sort of stuff going on, you know, in the closer or whatever. It has that element to it, right? Like it's definitely a lot different from the rest of the record, but it's not something that, you know, doesn't feel like it doesn't fit. You know, did I say that right? That was a double negative. So it feels like it fits. Yeah, that works. But no, this record, when it came out, I mean, I know you go back further with 4 Year Strong than I do. In fact, you know, this record, I think we did our episode on 4 Year Strong after this record came out. So like this was my first real introduction to them. Because I never really checked them out. I always knew about them, you know, being one of like the big kind of like easycore bands, but easycore was, you know, at its peak when I wasn't really listening to pop punk or punk rock that much, so I wasn't really following it. And then we decided to touch on it when we did our easycore series. But so this was my first real like listen through an album of theirs, and it blew my mind. And so like I think it's, for me, it's better than kind of some of the other stuff I've heard. I don't have that, you know, like that nostalgic attachment to some of those records. So when I hear this, like I hear that really like matured songwriting and craftsmanship. I know some people might be like, oh, it's not as heavy or it's not as hard or punk rock or whatever. It's like they kind of like, I guess like mellowed it out a little bit, but it's just, for me, it's just such a good record. So, and the fact that it made both of our top 5s, I think shows that. So what's next on your list?
I just want to say with that song, It's Cool, I can still picture like, so I was listening, so the album came out when it was super cold out here and I was biking to work. I was really excited to listen, and it's, you know, like 6:30 in the morning when I'm biking. And so I put this album on and I can still picture where I was on my bike when the kind of the opening, so the song kind of starts with these like guitars and just singing, and then it stops, and then it just like goes into like what you said, like you wouldn't expect. But I can still picture where I was, because I was just like, oh crap, like, you know, because in my mind I was like, okay, like the opening song, they're just kind of, you know, getting things prepped. I thought maybe that was just going to be it, and then I just had like the biggest smile on my face, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be good.
It's funny because I think when you were talking about Big Vibe, you made a comparison between Seaway and 4 Year Strong, and I mean, it was the 90s influence. There is a song on this record, now I gotta double check which one it is, but I remember when I first heard it, I was like, oh, that sounds like Seaway is what it reminded me of. And I think like maybe one of this, I mean, this is going to sound terrible. I think one of the, maybe I think it's Learn to Love the Lie reminds me of Seaway. And I think one of the guys in the band has actually worked with Seaway, because I commented on a YouTube video. I was like, oh, I was like, Seaway, is that you? And then someone was like, well, these guys have been along since, Seaway or been around since Seaway was in their diapers, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I was just making a joke because it reminds me of Seaway. Anyway, someone commented at that point that I think someone in the band had worked with them. And so, where the heck was I going with this? Oh, you were talking about It's Cool. Just another Seaway connection. Now these two bands both have songs where, like on this, the music cuts out and he's like, it's cool, and then comes back in, right? Like to the heavy part. Whereas like Seaway, if you go back to Colorblind, they've got that one song where it cuts out and he goes, everything is cool, man. And it goes into a riff. I was like, so they're both just, cutting to nothing and singing about things being cool. They're the same band. They're the same band. That's what it boils down to. Yeah. Sorry. What was next in your top 5?
Yes, I'm going with August Burns Red, Guardians. So this is one of those bands that if they have a new album coming out, it's almost guaranteed that it's going to be on my year's top list. They've been one of my favorites since 2005. I love everything they put out, and this album is no exception. There's everything you love about ABR and more on this album. It sees the band giving less time to maybe the more kind of experimental aspects of previous albums, yet continuing to lean into the heavy and melodic side that they do so well. There's a lot of standout tracks on this album for me. I feel like they crafted songs that are more memorable and easier to latch onto without kind of losing any of their integrity or compromising the sound that their fans expect from them. This is definitely my most listened to album of the year, as it's the only one out of my top 5 that I have the actual physical CD to. So it's been in my van all year, and so because of that, it just constantly gets put on, and I love it so much.
What's your favorite song?
Standout song, I'm going to go with Lighthouse. So it just has a really cool sound to it. It's a little kind of haunting at times, but it's still super catchy in its own way. Vocally, it kind of leans more into the kind of Architects territory, where it's more kind of that melodic screaming. It's got this repeating chorus, which isn't very typical for ABR. And the message of the song is really cool too, with emphasis on kind of opening your eyes to people groups around you that kind of easily get forgotten. And so it's just a great song that adds a lot to the album for me.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this before. I'm not much of a fan of August Burns Red. I've tried. We discussed, what was their last record? It wasn't you and I that talked about it, but
Phantoms.
Back when this was Music to My Peers, Jordan and I talked about it. And I think I basically just said, oh, it just feels like it's a constant assault on my ears. Like it was just like
Phantom Anthem.
That's right. Phantom Anthem. Yeah. But yeah, they've always just been a band where like they're insanely talented. And it just doesn't click for me. That's fine. Doesn't have to. So the next one on my list would be Hot Mulligan and their album You'll Be Fine. So this record, Hot Mulligan, is a band, I guess you could say like an emo revival band sort of thing that I'd been familiar with for a couple records, but they were sort of one that they were a band that I enjoyed, and every time I put them on, I'd be like, oh yeah, why don't I listen to these guys more? And then I'd kind of forget about them and move on to it because there's just so much music, right? That's the way life is. And this record came out, and immediately I was struck by the artwork that this record has, because it's a guy sitting beside, I think he's sitting, like it's like a painting, and he's sitting beside like a pond or whatever with his dog. His dog is sitting beside him, but the person, there is no person. It's just like a hat and glasses and like wearing like a red hoodie or whatever, but there's no face, no head, no nothing. Like, so it's just kind of like this neat sort of artwork. And I was like, initially I was taken aback by that. I was like, that's kind of cool. And when it came out, it was an album that I immediately liked and loved. And then much in the same way as happened with all of their other records, I just kind of forgot about it. And then as time went on, I forced myself to go back to it, because it would always be in the back of my mind when I'd be like thinking about things to listen to, and then finally I was like, fine, I'm gonna listen to it. And it's been a record that is like, even recently I've had a hard time turning off. Like it's just so good. There's a lot of things that remind me of like the early 2000s like post-hardcore emo thing, like Taking Back Sunday sort of vibes going on, like without sounding like Taking Back Sunday, like even at all, but just things that remind me of that. So it's kind of sweet with that. The song that really the thing about this record is they've got some song titles that are song titles for the ages, I think. I should read some examples before I read the song that I picked, because it's always something that I kind of laugh at when I'm like looking at the album. Let's see, we've got equip sunglasses, but like there's asterisks on either side, so it's like an action of like equipping sunglasses. Dirty office bongos. They've got a song called Backyard, but they took all of the vowels out of it, so it's just Bickard. And then they've got they're just like songs where I'm like, how did you decide to name it that? Like they have a song called They have a song called Analog Fade. I'm like, why did you call it that? The only thing I can think of is in the beginning of the song, it kind of like fades in. There's guitar parts that fade in. I'm like, are they literally referencing, because like their mixer, like whoever like mixed the record or engineered the record, like actually faded those guitars in by hand, sort of thing, versus using a computer type thing. They got a song called Feel Like Crab. Not Feel Like Crap, but Feel Like Crab. But anyway, the song that I wanted to go with is a song called Green Squirrel in Pretty Bad Shape. I love the opening half of this song. It's got like this clean guitar riff that it's kind of one of their more mellow songs for the opening half. Really clean, nice guitar work, and then it kind of really opens up in the last half, and it's just like instantly singing along sort of thing. It's been a record that over the course of the year, because when did it come out? That's the one question. I feel like it's been out for quite some time. March 6th. So it came out right before the world shut down. Yeah. And it's over the course of the year has grown on me quite a bit. Have you listened to it at all?
I skimmed through it when it came out, as I do with lots of albums. If there's, if either you mention it or if they're just one of those bands that's like, okay, I know people talk about bands like this, but yeah, I think it was kind of pretty quick. It was like, yeah, I don't think this is something I'm going to fully enjoy.
I think I described it to someone. I said, it reminds me somewhat of Blue in the Dark by Bearings, like musically a little bit, but with way more like spazzy vocals. Because he like goes in and out of this.
That's probably what turned me off.
He like goes in and out of this like sing, scream, in between sort of thing all the time. But which is, I think at first I was like, it feels like a little much, and then it grows on you. And yeah, I've grown to love the record over the years. So what is your final album in your top 5?
Yeah, so speaking of spazzy vocals, this band does it, but in a way that I really like it, and that is Dragged Under's The World Is In Your Way. So this band and album kind of came out of nowhere. I hadn't seen or heard anything about this album until its release. I can still remember being at work and listening to it and texting you about it, and just kind of going back and forth and just being like, oh, like, what is this? Like, this is really cool. And I think that by the end of the day, we were both like, okay, this is a really cool album. We would mention like, oh, I hear this influence and this influence on it. And this record stands out because, like I said, you can hear so many influences on it, from punk to metal and new metal to old school hardcore. They kind of do it all in a way that sounds cohesive and easy to digest. It's super catchy, which I love, and they incorporate the catchiness, into the heavy songs too. So not just kind of the more popular ones, but this is an album that I've gone back to so many times over the year and will continue to. They actually just released a deluxe version of the album, which also has 2 awesome new songs on it, as well as possibly my favorite Christmas song of the year. So bonus points to them. It's overall just a super good record from an up-and-coming band for whom I can't wait to hear more of. And my favorite song I'm going to go with is the opening track, The Real You, as I think it just kind of encompasses so many great elements of the band that I love. And I can remember how it first kind of grabbed my attention when I put it on. And so there's a few of those. The Slick Shoes one is also the first song on that one too. So yeah, sometimes that's just what it is when it's like the first thing that grabs your attention, because it's like that's what you remember and keeps you coming back. So
that record, I remember like it came out. What am I trying to say? There's something there was a point I had there that I was going to start making. I do remember that. So it's got like Ryan Fluffy. I can't remember his last name. He's
Fingers or something, or
he's a YouTuber, like guitarist. And I remember I think you maybe shared a music video or something. I was like, wait a minute. Cause I watch, a fair bit of his stuff, especially when I'm at work and spending, half the day watching YouTube. He does some great videos. And I was like, wait, I know that guy. Well, not personally, but I know who that guy is. And it is a great record. And there are influences all over that record, which is one of the things I think is kind of fun because it's almost Easter eggish. But it's also a record that I actually forgot was released this year. And I mean, I went when I was going through like the releases of this year, I remember seeing it and putting it on my list. And I was like, but when I put it on my list, I was like, holy crap, that was this year. Like that
was like right at the beginning of January.
But that's the thing, right? Like where we're at now, it's like, well, it's almost a year ago. So it's like, it has that sort of thing where you were talking about like with bands releasing new albums in December being like, well, that was released last year type thing, right? Like when January rolls around, like it's almost this thing where I'm like, holy crap, that was this year. And I mean, I think 2020 is also just such a messed up year that it's like, oh, you know, this year feels like more years than one sort of thing, right? So
yeah, so I think it was good that they re-released it just to put that bug in people's ears again and get them excited with some new material. So great choice on their behalf. I
think that's also what threw me off was that they had this deluxe version or whatever come out within the same year. I was like, huh? Oh, okay, right. All right. I mean, I guess, but you're right. Like it is a great way to kind of like in such a weird year to put that bug back in people's ears. So my final album in my top 5 would be Touche Amore's Lament. Touche Amore, their last record, you mentioned earlier about, I think it was Lightworker, having the song about his mom going through breast cancer, and then you briefly shared kind of your story. Well, Touche Amore, their last album before Lament, I believe, was that their last one? Was Stage 4? Now I'm curious because they had Beating It. Well, oh no, it was Beating a Dead Horse. It was like a 10-year anniversary or whatever re-release thing that came out. But Stage 4 was about the passing of Jeremy, the lead singer of Touche Amore, the passing of his mother. So it's like a really hard listen. But that record is where I fell in love with Touche Amore because they used a lot of language. Like my son, he went through cancer and he survived, but there's a lot of language that was used on Stage 4 that was just like so familiar to me, right? And I was like kind of attached, and they're a really unique sounding band. They're a post-hardcore band who like definitely has elements from all over the place, and Jeremy in his vocals has a tendency, like he's basically yelling all the time. Stage 4 he did a little more singing. I don't know if he sings at all on this record on Lament, but he like, it's almost like this implied melody that he has when he yells. It's really weird. Like, I don't know how to explain it. I don't know any other vocalists necessarily that are like it, where I feel like you can sing a harmony with his screams. It's this weird sort of thing. But Lament ended up being a record where Touche Amore is a hard band to listen to because you feel like you go on this journey with them, and at the end of the record you always want some kind of resolution. Especially on this record, you want, like, everything looks really shitty, but at the end of the day he's got this one thing that you're like, okay, well, at least I can end on this happy note. And that doesn't happen on this record. And you're just kind of left like, like they're a band that are very strong for me, like lyrically, where I love like sitting down and listening to them and going through the words that he's saying and how he's expressing them. And they're very much that way. The song that I wanted to kind of highlight off this album is the song Reminders, because, like I said, it's been a crazy, crappy year. But this song in the chorus, he sings, I need reminders of the love that I have. Like, just like all these things, like he's talking about like being in a low place, but like also being like reminded of like the hope and good that there still is in the people that he loves, and, the people surrounding him and whatever. It's just kind of like this like feel good song. The video is also great because it's just a bunch of people with their pets and just like all happy, with their pets, and it's different videos submitted by, I think, like fans and some of their friends and all this kind of stuff. It's pretty cool. But yeah, Touche Amore's Lament is a great record. Did you get a chance? I know you're not a huge fan of Touche Amore, but did you get a chance to listen to this one at all?
Yeah, I did skim through this one too, because they're one of those bands that, I mean, I've seen their name around, for years, and a lot of people really love it. And so I wanted to, every so often it's like, I don't think I like this band, but I'm going to listen just to make sure I'm not missing out on something. And so I did listen to it, and it's got some kind of flair similar to bands like Me Without You, and some of that kind of spazzy kind of ish stuff. Not that maybe that's not the right word, but
Yeah.
you know, there's just kind of more going on to it, and so I mean, I can definitely appreciate it. It's not something I kind of choose to listen to, but you know, when I put it on, it's like, okay, there's a lot of passion behind this, and you know, a lot goes into putting these songs together. And
I think, yeah. Well, and I think for me, like, if they weren't a band that, were as engaging lyrically for me, it might be harder for me to kind of get into. But like, those are things that can like almost redeem bands for me, because I could see if they were just singing about whatever, if it just wasn't stuff that captured me, I could kind of be like, well, I mean, his vocals are just kind of always going in that sort of like grating territory with just how he's yelling, and you know, I feel like they're a band where I could see why I can understand why they wouldn't like them, but I can also fully understand why people love them.
yeah,
It's just got to hit you correctly. So why don't we try to then figure out if we can. I'm going to try and place your top 5 in order, and then you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, and you can reveal your top 5. And then,
okay.
and then, did you need a reminder of what the albums were that I did, or did you write them down? I wrote all yours down.
Yeah, you got 4 Year Strong, Casket Lottery, Touche Amore, Hot Mulligan, and Spanish Love Songs.
No,
Is that?
no.
Which
You're
one did I
close.
miss?
Not Spanish Love Songs, but Be Well.
Oh yeah, Be Well, right.
So I'm going to say that your number 5. Last year I nailed this. I got it 100% correct.
Yeah.
And I was super confident. This year I'm not so confident. So we'll see. Number 5, I said you went with Slick Shoes. Number 4, Light Worker. Number 3, 4 Year Strong. Number 2, Dragged Under. And number 1, August Burns Red.
You got, so I kind of have them in mixed up order here, so now I gotta go. Number 1, I have August Burns Red.
Okay, so I got your number 1 right.
Number 2 is 4 Year Strong.
Okay.
Number 3 is Dragged Under.
Yeah.
Number 4 is Slick Shoes.
Oh, okay, yeah. So I had them all wrong. The two. Well, I got your number 1 right, but then it was funny because the flip flops. Did you? No, you didn't read them in that order. But the flip flops, where I was like flip flopping between them in my head. I was like, does he go Slick Shoes 5 or 4? Does he go? So it's funny.
Yeah, I know it's only 5, but it's especially hard when, you know, I think besides Brain Pain, the rest of yours and the rest of mine aren't ones that like each one of us loved as much, and so it's kind of hard to put in that place of like, well, I'm kind of just basing it off on like how much you talked about it, or like comments you made about it. So
the only reason I knew August Burns Red was number 1 was because you made the comment about it's the only physical CD you bought, and it's in your van and you listen to it a ton. Yeah. So I was like, okay. Yeah. As you're saying that, I wrote number 1.
Yeah. So I kind of thought that was like today when I was just looking through the notes again, I was like, oh, does that kind of give away that? Because when I wrote them, I don't know if I thought we were doing this, but anyways.
All right, let's see if you can guess my 5.
I don't feel super confident here, but I'm going to say number 1, 4 Year Strong, just because it's been out the longest and you talked about it lots. I'm going to say Be Well is number 2. Number 3, Casket Lottery. Number 4, Touche Amore. And number 5, Hot Mulligan.
You did really well. You got 5, 4, and 3 right, but you flipped 2 and 1. So number 1 was Be Well. Okay. Number 2 was 4 Year Strong. Casket Lottery, Touche Amore, Hot Mulligan. Hot Mulligan and Spanish Love Songs were the 2 that kind of for sure kept flip-flopping back and forth. And I had another album that was in my top 5 that didn't even in the end make my top 10, because in the end I decided to consider it an EP.
Okay.
And so I'm like, that's just gonna, because it's this weird middle ground that we'll bring it up when we talk about, you know, our top EPs of the year, which is in the next episode, because Guppy season is only just beginning.
Yeah, get ready.
So those are each of our, I mean, I guess what we're saying is the combined number 1 album of the year is 4 Year Strong for this show. Yeah. Because it was 4 Year Strong your number 2?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was both of our number 2s, which is actually pretty respectable, pretty solid. But yeah, so we are going to discuss in the next episode. We're going to highlight some of our favorite EPs. Plus, we've got a laundry list of awards that we're going to quote unquote awards that we're going to give out because, and I say a laundry list, I literally keep adding ideas of like, oh, this would be fun. Oh, this would be fun.
Sweet.
So we'll see what we end up with, and if it becomes a marathon of an episode. But that is our respective top 10s for 2020. Thanks for listening. Go follow us at Growing Punk Pod on all of our social medias, Twitter and Instagram, basically. And hit us up at growingpunkpod.com. That's our website. We've got different posts there as well. You can find all the episodes there. You can also find out this, obviously, wherever you listen to podcasts and YouTube. But at growingpunkpod.com, we've also got a link to merch. You can grab yourself a t-shirt. I know Christmas has come and gone at this point, but get yourself a late Christmas present. Why not? But that will do it for us. So thanks again for listening. Goodbye.
You know what, you guys? Soon Ryan will learn the magic of Chrismica. Worry not. I will convert it.